On September 1st, in just 6 days, a law is scheduled to go into effect in the state of Texas that would ban all abortions at approximately 6 weeks into pregnancy. That is long before most women even know they are pregnant. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court of the United States has agreed to hear a direct challenge to the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, which first legalized abortion for women in 1973. We are fast approaching a tipping point in what has been a decades-long Christian fascist war on the lives and rights of women. And yet, almost nobody knows about this. And among those who do know, particularly the reproductive rights groups tied to the Democratic Party, there is no mobilization of the outrage of millions of women and others to stop this. So we are really pleased to have here on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show somebody who is going to help us get into this moment to understand the stakes of it, to understand what needs to be done about this and how this fits into the fight right now to make an actual revolution. Toni Redtree is a longtime writer for revcom.us. She is a member of the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour. Among the pieces she's written, one of them I want to highlight is the polemic, Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger by Rebecca Traister, or How to Domesticate Your Rage and Get In on a System that Exploits and Torments Women All Over the World. Toni has written on a number of other topics, but has put a particular focus on the oppression and the liberation of women, including the decades-long battle over abortion. So we're really glad to have her with us here today. Toni, welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thanks. It's really exciting to be here.
Oh, we're really happy to have you here for the first time. So I wanted to ask you, just to start out, if you could help our viewers understand, why is there such a vicious, relentless attack on women's right to abortion? What does this have to do with the social position of women overall?
Well, I think you're right. We're at a tipping point, and we're at a point where people could be hurtled back to a future that's just horrific, or actually we could bust these chains and take society to an entirely different epoch. And one of the reasons why abortion is so central to this question of the liberation of women is that for millennia, people were basically, biology was destiny. You had no choice, to have a child if you had sex and became pregnant. And, we're in the 21st century now, and that actually is no longer necessary. And, women have the ability, we have the technology, and we have the ability for people to actually have children when they decide to do so. Children are one of the most precious things on the planet. It's our most precious resource. It's the future. And, that's a wonderful thing if women choose to do that. But, it's also a necessity for women to be able to decide when and how they will have children. And forced motherhood is a form of female enslavement. That's the center of it, And I think one of the things that's happened is that, the ability to do this, as well as being out in the world and participating more in it, has actually created a situation where women are more independent. They have some autonomy over their decisions. And this is something that's actually driven the religious fundamentalists and Christian fascists and just fascists in general crazy ever since women won this right. And this is very much under assault, and that is actually where we're heading.
I wanted to bring in something that Bob Avakian wrote. He republished it in his New Year's statement earlier this year, but he actually wrote it originally 35 years ago about the situation facing women and some of the big changes in the world. And I want to read it and get your reaction to it now that this is even more acutely coming to a head right now. He wrote, "Over the past several decades in the U.S., there have been profound changes in the situation of women and the relations within the family. In only 1 of 10 families is there a, quote, model situation where the husband's role is the sole breadwinner and the wife is a totally dependent, quote, homemaker. With these economic changes have come significant changes in attitudes and expectations, and very significant strains, not only on the fabric of the family, but of social relations more broadly. The whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all forms of such enslavement? So that was written 35 years ago. This question is even more explosive. He says a powder keg, it's even more explosive today. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on where we are and how what light this sheds.
Well, it was very prescient, and here we are. We're here at this tipping point. And I think this is a statement that actually he's broadened to actually the entire moment that we're in right now in terms of what direction society is going to take. I think there are different aspects of this. One is why this has come to be. And, I think some of what he's describing there is actually a situation where just the very workings of capitalism itself have actually undermined and torn apart a lot of the traditional ways that the family has actually been organized, including under a system of capitalism. It's 1 in 10 there. You have a situation now where the typical traditional nuclear family is actually pretty non-existent. I think it's about 27% of families in the U.S. that actually are living that way. And one of the most rapidly expanding situations is that of women who are actually raising families on their own, which has doubled in this period of time. And now we were facing the pandemic, and a lot of women are actually being forced back out of the work world and into the family because somebody has to take care of the children. But this situation is actually kind of on one hand undermined the traditional role of women, but under capitalism, you actually can't change that fundamentally. This is something that's completely woven into its actual workings and operation. They need the traditional family in order to actually raise future generations, to instill the values, it's a basic economic unit of society that's absolutely essential. It's tearing things apart, but there isn't a resolution within the confines of capitalism to this contradiction. And at the same time, it's actually, engendered a reaction to this among sections of the population, especially a Christian fascist movement that's been developing for quite some time that actually really is reacting to this by wanting to restore things to the way they used to be. To the rightful position of man as head of his household, women and children as his property, and seeing actually the growing independence of women as a threat to that. And this is also very interwoven. It's not just the question of women. This is something that I think Avakian has been pointing to, and bringing forward the actual work of other writers and people who've been working on this question, that it's very woven together with white supremacy, with American supremacy, with the kind of malignant, malicious, militant, male masculinity in terms of the culture, and these are extremely woven together into what is now a big tent fascist movement.
I think that paints quite a picture of the reactionary resolution, which, as you're describing, it's wanting to take things back, but also a real fueled by a real hatred and desire for revenge that women ever broke out of the traditional realm, and a revengist attitude towards Black people, towards immigrants, towards all of the things bound up with "Make America Great Again" in this fascist tent that you're describing. So that's, on the one hand, the fascist resolution. This quote that we're drawing from Bob Avakian also talks about a revolutionary resolution, which I know we'll talk more about, but he poses it's one or the other. I wonder if there's anything more you want to say about that side of it.
Well, I think that's the point. Here we are in the 21st century we're looking at a time where actually it's possible to actually really break these chains for the first time in millennia. There's the productive capacity in the world as a whole to actually fully involve women in the actual running and administration of society and every other endeavor. That's actually what's materially possible in the world right now. It can't be done within the confines of a system that requires the oppression of women and is actually holding all of society back. Avakian and all of us who are followers of him are working for actually a revolutionary solution to this, because we're also at a moment where, even though you have all this, this fascist terror that actually has a lot of people very afraid and cowed, within that, there's also a situation where this is bringing to a head the fact that the society that's being torn apart is creating a situation that actually you've not seen in this country for 150 years. It's, you've never seen it. This is a really unprecedented situation. You haven't seen anything like this since the Civil War. And that pulling apart of things at the top of society and the stark realization of the different futures that are actually possible does give rise to a moment where, if the revolutionary forces can actually seize on and organize the forces that are necessary for this, you could actually make a revolution in a country like this. And that future, where women are actually a driving force for actually propelling history forward to a whole nother epoch, is actually possible.
So I want to bring us back to the immediate juncture that we're in, where in 6 days, Texas is about to criminalize abortion, effectively criminalize abortion for all women, where the Supreme Court is going to be considering a case that could gut Roe v. Wade, gut abortion rights nationally, and there is almost no response. I mean, it's completely muted. Most people don't know it's happening, and among those who do know, in the Democratic Party and the so-called women's rights groups tied to it, the reproductive rights groups that are tied to the Democratic Party, overwhelmingly, the plan in the face of this is to plan for defeat. I mean, it takes different forms. Some of the reproductive rights groups are trying to pass laws, defensive laws at the state level, planning for when Roe v. Wade is overturned, then they can protect abortion in a few local areas. Some people are planning to raise money to help get women across state lines when abortion becomes criminalized in their states. But all of it across the board is preparing exactly for the Christian fascists to win, and then to help a few women within that. And I think this needs to be spoken to, so I want to throw that to you.
I think there's a broader question here that I want to refer people back to these articles by BA that have been up recently. There's various things about the rules that are actually stacked in favor of the fascists because of the whole history of the country and compromises that have been made. And you do have a court that's actually now stacked against Roe versus Wade and a lot of other fundamental rights that are happening. And you have the Democrats who are actually playing by the rules. And so they're putting their head down and kind of preparing for the long, patient struggle to push the pendulum the other way. And there's a basic thing wrong with this argument, which is actually this is not a pendulum swing. This is a moment in history where actually you have a fascist movement from the top of society down that's actually cohered to seize the ship of state and change everything, to change all the norms that people have been used to for so long in terms of the way this country has been run, from a capitalist democracy, which itself is a form of dictatorship, to one that's just openly fascist, and where they're not just going after the masses of people, but their own political opponents. So that's the moment that we're actually in. And I think, the response of Biden and the Democrats is actually to find common ground with a section of the ruling class that they want to kind of keep together. I think this is a point BA has also made, that the fascists have the initiative on this, and the unity that's going to be found is going to be on their terms. So what do you see happening? You have Biden who's come in, who's, honestly a socially conservative, who's wrapped himself in the role of compassion for women, who won't even say the word abortion. This is as good as you've got up there. that people are actually kind of counting on to do the right thing. And they're not. They're actually, as you said, preparing for defeat. And I think this is and this has got a lot of people paralyzed. They're not sounding the alarm, and so a lot of people don't even know about this. But I also think this whole logic has actually got to get taken on. I mean, I just have to tell this one story because I think it typifies something. I traveled recently, and I got off the plane, and I drove by this building where the entire side of the building had a mural on it with a picture of the Earth. Was, I think, probably run, an ad for some like super hip capitalist storage company where Americans like to store their stuff. And it's got a picture of the globe on it with a sign that says, "Love her before she's gone." So it's actually not even on this. There's a whole way that people are actually kind of preparing themselves for potentially the end of humanity. When we're at a moment actually where we actually could get humanity beyond this epic of capitalism. And that's a mindset that actually has to be overthrown. The idea that they're going to take away the most fundamental right a woman has, that should be a showstopper. That should be a society stop everything moment. When the Beautiful Rising began, nobody looked to what was happening on the rules of this, that, or the other thing. This was an outrage. People went out into the streets, and it changed everything for a while. And I think we're at a similar moment. We should learn from what the women did in Poland, but we should also learn that we should not wait. We're not going to wait for them to overturn and take away this right. People have to be out in the streets now.
I think that's so important. If people were out, if the millions of women who are going to be affected by this and all the men who don't want to see that happen and other people were out in the streets raising bloody hell about this, not only would that put a huge brake on and potentially stop this nightmare that is headed towards women, it would contribute enormously to people lifting their heads and thinking about the deeper source of where is this patriarchy, this vicious fascism coming from, and what possibility there actually is to put an end to this. And we would be out there too, fighting for people to see the need for revolution, organizing people into the revolution. It would contribute enormously to the possibility of breaking these chains once and for all. And I want to come back to this as our last question, to really look at, I think, in this moment, exactly what you were describing with the billboard about the planet Love Her Before You Lose Her, with the so-called pro-choice movement planning for defeat, with all the ways people are resigning themselves to a nightmare future or trying to blot it out and pretend it's not going on. It's very easy to see the negative. But there's something very precious that BA has done in this piece, The Rare Time When Revolution Becomes Possible, and this quote from 35 years ago about a radical resolution one way or the other, where he's talking about the real possibility of revolution and now in this time. And I think it'd be important to talk, to end with, how do you see the possibility of actually wrenching a beautiful future out of this situation?
He's seeing a reality here, which is that the coming apart of things at the top of society is not just negative. It actually shows the pulling apart of a ruling class that can no longer rule the same way. And within that, there actually is the possibility of maturing and ripening a revolutionary situation if the organized forces for that actually are capable of bringing millions of people into this. And it is such a moment, and those things come along very, very rarely. But it actually does require people understanding that that's the case. And there's a lot of emphasis in the article that was recently written by Avakian that people actually need to know this. We have to get the word out on this. Hardly anybody knows about this. And people also have to be struggled with to raise their sights to not just what is, but what's possible. And, there's a lot of things that we actually have to throw overboard. A lot of the training that's kind of been left by a legacy of identity politics, for instance, all this stay in your lane business. It's kind of like, look, folks, that's not even defensive driving. You can't even deal with this stuff that way. You've got to look at what's happening on the road, You have to look up and see what's happening on the road, you know. You have to, understand what's happening in the other lane. You have to understand what's happening with these crazy Humvee drivers that don't give a fuck who they kill on the road. But you also have to recognize that this road is going somewhere that's no good. But there's also a plan for taking an entirely different route. And people actually have to they have to know about this and see that there's a possibility for actually getting to an entirely different destination than the one that actually currently exists.
All right. Well, Toni Redtree, we are so pleased that you were able to join us here today for the first time, but I'm sure it won't be the last time on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. I do want to put a call out to everybody watching. If you have a passion around this question, if you want to help with research, you want to be a writer, you want to help correspond, we're going to be staying on this story here on the Revolution Nothing Less show and on our website, revcom.us. So write to us at therevcoms@gmail.com to get in touch and be part of that. And one more time, thank you, Toni.
Thank you.